Chapter 20. Don't touch the teachers, but you are listening at novelfull.audio. A chilly wave of aura first spilled out when the jade box was opened. The temperature in the warehouse decreased rapidly, causing Han Shuo to shudder involuntarily again. He quickly refocused his concentration on the item within the green jade box. It was a verdant ball. Its surface like an emerald, winking with ephemeral green light. There was a red dot inside, like a drop of roiling blood, oscillating randomly within the ball. His mind suddenly hurting, Han Shuo only felt that his mental strength started draining expeditiously towards the ball. It felt a bit like when he was using necromancy magic. With the injection of Han Shuo's mental strength, the surface of the ball shone with even more green, and the red dot in the center abruptly let out a small strand of red light. Pain. A keenly honed dagger savagely stirred up Han Shuo's brains. With the loss of his mental strength, Han Shuo's mind hurt like a living hell. He had never endured such cruel agony in all his years of life. In the midst of this extreme pain, Han Shuo should have fainted dead away, but the eerie thing was that Han Shuo's mind was clearer than it had ever been. Han Shuo even felt that because his mind was more awake than ever, it was exacerbating and infinitely magnifying the agony. Both of his hands clutching his head, Han Shuo was like a wild beast being slowly cut by 1,000, 1,000,000 knives. He emitted a raspy, low roar that didn't sound like it could come from a human. Han Shuo's mental strength continued to slowly flow towards the round ball, along with the continuation of the inhumane pain. At this moment, the tendons stood out on Han Shuo's forehead, neck, and exposed arms, like multiple worms wriggling in his body. His body had started filling out a bit, and his muscles were now tensed with explosive power. As Han Shuo felt that his mental strength was about to be completely drained, the magical yuan within his body flowed from his neck to his brain. As the magical yuan entered his brain, that was already splitting open from pain, the soul-searing agony seemed to increase 10 times in intensity. The mental strength that had vanished with fleeting speed into the ball, came crashing back like a huge wave rolling onto shore, drowning Han Shuo in an instant. He could finally endure it no more and fainted. He felt the weariness of a 10,000-kilometer march after he slowly woke up, but his brain was abnormally awake. When his eyes refocused, he took a look around and discovered that even the grain in the wooden door in front of him seemed quite clear. He gave a light as the changes within him stopped him in his tracks. The last time he had felt this way was when he gained mental strength after a series of coincidences. He had also felt that his senses were heightened then, and hastened to concentrate his mental strength again upon noting that this feeling had returned in force. Exuberant joy immediately blossomed on his face, as he thought, the saying of what doesn't kill you makes you strong is true. Even that amount of danger hadn't been enough to end me just now, and now I've mysteriously benefited from that disaster. He could feel that his mental strength had increased in spades, and was much more potent than the amount of mental strength he'd labored to increase over the past 2 months. These mystifying things had truly happened, shocking Han Shuo beyond belief as his gaze fell once more onto the dark green ball. The faint green luster on its surface seemed to have dimmed somewhat, but the drop of red within it was even more vibrant. He frowned as he backed a few inches away, and made a close observation of the verdant ball. He suddenly felt that this ball was very similar to something. After a few moments of thought, he started in fright and made a sudden inspection of the ball. It was very much like an eyeball, and the more he looked at it, the more it seemed to be one. The dot of red within the verdant ball seemed to be an eye sizing Han Shuo up, giving him an exceedingly creeped-out feeling. He shuddered rather violently as he closed the jade box with all the hair on his neck raised. A sharp click rang out as the jade box locked itself again, and the key, that had been stuck in the indentation, automatically bounced out. Han Shuo shook his head as he banished the association between ball and eyeball from his mind. The more he contemplated the matter, the more he thought there was something strange about this ball. If it wasn't for the magical yuan circulating to his brain today, his mental strength would have surely been sucked dry by the ball, and he would have broken underneath the inhumane pain. He would have been truly driven mad and become an idiot. But when the magical yuan had made its way to his brain, the depleted mental strength had come rushing back like a river running upstream, and had even been greatly improved and increased. This made Han Shuo feel that the ball was even more uncanny and unpredictable. He could vaguely feel that this ball was no ordinary object, otherwise Duke would have hardly killed Dylan for the jade box. As for the verdant ball within the jade box, Han Shuo could not fathom what its purpose was, but because the ball had almost turned him into a real idiot, his heart still jumped with fear when thinking about it. He stored the jade box underneath the bed again, planning to experiment with the item inside once he had figured out what it was. The next day, Han Shuo woke up feeling that his body was in much better condition than it had been the day before. He caught a glimpse of Carrie and Borg from afar when washing up. The two were cleaning the statues on the way to class. They seemed to have woken up a lot earlier than usual, as they kept yawning, even at this time of day. Carrie and Borg flashed eager smiles and greetings from a long ways away when they sighted Han Shuo, also reminding him to speak to Master Fanny as early as possible. After downing his breakfast and listening to another lecture from Master Jean on the foundations of magic as he swept the hallway for the necromancy classrooms, Han Shuo walked directly towards the training fields. Brian, Fitch is in the training field asking Master Fanny some questions regarding magical knowledge. Please speak to her soon, or the two of us are really screwed. Han Shuo bumped into Carrie and Borg at the door. The two had just finished cleaning the training fields, and pleaded with Han Shuo as soon as they saw him. Han Shuo nodded as he said lazily, all right, I'll go find Master Fanny now. Fitch had some bad blood with Jean, not to mention that Fitch was already a journeyman mage. Therefore he naturally had no need to continue to listen to Jean's foundational knowledge classes. Fitch was gazing at Fanny on the side, completely mesmerized. Love, desire, and the light of greed mixed together and sparkled in his eyes. His eyes kept roaming over Fanny's beautiful body, and he didn't even notice Han Shuo's arrival. Fitch, watch this. Even with my eyes covered, I can still command dark creatures to seek out the correct target based on previous memory. Fanny's eyes were covered as a few zombies bypassed several obstacles, using the clubs in their hands to land hard hits onto wooden targets as she spoke. Focused on teaching, Fanny naturally had no idea that Fitch was not paying any attention to her words. Fitch's attention was purely concentrated on her beautiful curves. Upon seeing that Fitch completely ignoring Fanny's explanation, and that his gaze was continuously combing over her body, Han Shuo thought silently that no wonder this kid has failed to advance to adept class even after multiple tries. Judging from the situation, Fitch must have used additional tutoring as an excuse for some alone time with Fanny. Fanny's covered eyes must have something to do with instructing Fitch on how to use his heart to command dark creature attacks. Han Shuo noted quite a few obstacles in the surroundings as he walked over, carefully avoiding all of them as he moved towards Fitch and Fanny. Just as he was about to reach Fanny and Fitch, Fitch suddenly awoke from his idiotic stupor and turned his head slightly. When he saw that it was Han Shuo, a hint of unconcealed disgust appeared in Fitch's eyes. Fitch followed that up with a movement of his staff, and 2 lines of an incantation in a low voice. Some of the obstacles on the ground suddenly seemed to be alive, as some withered, broken, white bones came hurtling towards Han Shuo's butt. Some ropes also tightened onto the bones and came flying with them, seeking to entangle Han Shuo like a snake. Han Shuo's body was a bit weaker than normal after the events of last night. His panicked dance of evasion was a bit messy, was finally tripped by a rope that suddenly appeared and stumbled towards Fitch and Fanny. At this moment, Fanny was still concentrating her mental strength on directing the dark creature's attacks, and her mouth kept summarizing her actions. Although her ears caught a few sounds, she paid them no heed. Seeing that he was about to fall onto Fitch and Fanny, Han Shuo still reached out wildly for something to stabilize himself even though his heart was calm, but at this moment, a trace of a cold smile tugged at Fitch's lips. He raised his staff slightly and aimed it towards the falling Han Shuo, obviously up to no good. Panicking inside now as well, Han Shua forcefully twisted his body to the left in mid-air, trying to avoid Fitch's attack. When his body started falling towards Fanny, the results of Han Shua's magic training came to bear as his body miraculously stopped after sucking in his waist and pushing out with his stomach. But, Han Shua didn't manage to retract his randomly flailing right arm in time, and it landed on Fanny's pert, well-rounded butt. The ecstasy of supple, tender, well-filled-out curve immediately traveled the point of contact between Han Shua and Fanny, back to his brain. In curious coincidence, Han Shua actually gave a light pinch, before realizing what he was doing and backing up violently. He understood the insanity of his actions just now and was extremely frightened, thinking that there was no way Fanny would forgive him. Why had he pinched her butt cheek, even though it had felt wondrous? As he practically flew in retreat, Han Shua looked at Fitch, who glaring back at Han Shua with eyes spitting fire and a body trembling in rage. It was as if Han Shua had committed something terrible such as murdering Fitch's entire family. Fanny also exclaimed in shock and immediately ripped off the black cloth covering her eyes. Fanny is never going to forgive me now. Shit. Shit. Han Shua thought. Pa. 2 slaps. Fitch had been furiously staring at Han Shua when 2 red palm prints appeared on his face. Fanny was enraged, and stared at Fitch with killing intent, her lofty breasts heaving, and she raged, "Damned Fitch, how dare you take advantage and violate me." Chapter 21. It really wasn't me you are listening at novelfull.audio. I didn't. It was Brian. Fitch was aghast and loudly protested his innocence. Pa. Another 2 slaps, Fitch's cheeks were now puffed up. Fanny stared at Fitch in a towering rage as she bit off her words, "How dare you make excuses? Brian is such an honest person, how could he have committed such a foul act? It must have been you." Brian was at a loss for words as he gloated inwardly. He hastily painted a picture of honest, dumb innocence on his face as he looked at Fitch and Fanny. He smiled dully, "What's wrong? Master Fanny, it really wasn't me." Fitch was suddenly the most wronged man in the world as he clutched his cheeks and protested loudly. "Stop lying. Get out. Now." Fanny wore an expression of exasperation that iron wouldn't improve and become steel, Chinese expression of wishing someone would improve, and replied heatedly. Fitch's face was sore and saw that Fanny was ready to erupt with rage at any moment. He knew that any explanation would be of no use, and was deathly afraid that Fanny would strike out again if he sent her up a wall. He smiled bitterly and nodded, heading outside the training fields with a face full of dejection. When he passed by Brian, Fitch paused and glared at Han Shua viciously for a few moments, gritting his teeth and saying softly, "Bastard." Han Shua pretended complete innocence of Fitch's hate and even smiled honestly at him in a friendly, kind gesture. How come you suddenly got fat?" Fitch was infuriated and he turned his face away in resentment, after glaring at Han Shua one more time. He quickly bypassed the obstacles in his way and disappeared outside the door in a blink of an eye. "Brian, what are you doing here?" Master Fanny's anger abated as soon as Fitch left, and she posed a question to Han Shua. "Cleaning." Han Shua went to do his own thing in the corner of the training field. He picked up a broom and prepared to clean up the area a bit to get it ready for a subsequent round of necromancy students. "Oh, I see. Oh right, how's your back feeling? When your injuries have healed, I want to take a close look at what's going on with you. It's incredible that an agony of the soul magic could allow you to gain mental strength." Fanny was quite affable when faced with Han Shua, conversing with him peacefully and helping him clean up the obstacles on the ground with no haughty attitude at all. Much better. "Oh right, Master Fanny, can you not tell the school authorities what happened last night?" Han Shua absent-mindedly swept up broken bones and dust, and took a sniff of the right hand that had touched Fanny's butt when he had a moment. A faint, delicate fragrance emanated from the fingers of his right hand, making his heart lurch. His eyes immediately gazed strangely at Fanny's pert butt, which happened to be not too far away. Fanny's back arched slightly when she bent down to clear the obstacles, further accentuating the mesmerizing curve of her butt. It was as if it contained a hypnotizing power of temptation. Fanny was a bit startled by Han Shua's words and quickly straightened her lithe body. She turned to look at Han Shua and asked in astonishment. Why? Brian, you're not concentrating, you're stepping on the broom. He hadn't expected Fanny to abruptly turn around. Han Shua had a guilty conscience and hastily moved his foot off the broom, smiling dumbly afterwards. Carrie and Borg are actually good people. If you tell the school authorities what happened, they'll be fired. Life will be difficult if their families don't have the silver they earn anymore. Fanny gazed at Han Shua in amazement and slightly crooked a dainty eyebrow. She smiled after a moment and said, Brian, you're always so kind. You speak on their behalf even after they've bullied you. All right, I'll forget it, since even you, the victim, plead so. I won't put them in a difficult place. You are the key to my experiments, remember to tell me if anyone bullies you in the future. Kind. Han Shua was at a loss of words internally. Sure, what he was doing now was kind, otherwise he wouldn't have the opportunity to blackmail Carrie and Borg into doing his duties. If the two of them left, then everything would fall on him and Jack's shoulders. Who would give a crap about what happened to the latter? As Han Shua was thinking his random thoughts, Fanny looked at Han Shua suspiciously and spoke again. Brian, I don't think you're that crazy. Otherwise, how could you say what you've just said? Momentarily dumbfounded, Han Shua's heart skipped a beat. He hastily scratched his head and replied with some embarrassment, I sometimes feel like my mind is dull and foggy. I don't know what I do after that. I see. Looks like there are some negative after effects of the agony of the soul on your body. Don't worry. I'll give you a close inspection when your back heals. I'll definitely cure all your weird ailments. It's almost time for me to lead students in the next round of experiments. I'm going to get back and get ready. You can clean up the rest. Fanny chanted an incantation after speaking to Han Shua, sending the zombie warriors in the training field back to the other dimension, and then left in a whirl. Soon after Fanny had left, Han Shua left the ruins in the training field and left to find Carrie and Borg as well. He dictated arrogantly to them, Don't worry, I've already taken care of your business. The two of you can now go clean up the training field. Carrie and Borg was happily astonished, and ran off willy-nilly with mops and brooms, overjoyed to mop up behind Han Shua after showering a round of gratitude on him. Han Shua had no pressing things to do after leaving the training field. He became curious about the contents of the jade box after recalling the events of yesterday, and truly wanted to learn what the ball was. There was no way that he could ask anyone else about this, and thus decided to head to the Dark Major Library to see if there were any records of the ball. Each major had its own individual library within the Babylon Academy of Magic. The range of topics contained within the books of each library were exceedingly diverse, and held all the wisdom and descriptions of the major's collective knowledge bank. Generally speaking, libraries were not open to the public, and there were strict regulations regarding access for students from other majors. Using Jack's cleaning duties as an excuse, Han Shua swaggered into the Dark Major Library with a brush in hand. Brian, what are you doing here? Aren't you supposed to be cleaning the training field at this time? Little Fatty Jack was putting books away and was startled into a soft question when he saw Han Shua walk in with a brush. Carrie and Borg, those two idiots, will be the ones cleaning up the training field in the future. I'm here on serious business today. Han Shua smiled and picked up a random book in a relaxed manner. He glanced at it and put it back after realizing that it was a book on the foundational basics of dark magic. Carrie and Borg are cleaning the training field for you. How is that possible? Is it because they're scared of you after the beating in the training field yesterday? Little Fatty Jack had an expression of astonishment, but then remembered Han Shua's performance yesterday and looked at him with a bit of fear. "Oh right Brian, what happened to you yesterday? You seemed like a different person. Even though we're really close, even I was really afraid of you yesterday." Han Shua laughed lightly as he put one hand on Jack's shoulder. "That depends on who. If someone is making life difficult for me, I won't let him have an easy one either. Heh, with our relationship, there's no way that I would beat you up." "Oh right Jack, where are the books regarding magical items in the Dark Major Library?" Second bookcase in the back." "Why do you ask?" Jack pointed behind Han Shua and asked in confusion. "Nothing much, helping you clean." Han Shua smiled and walked towards the bookcase of magical item references. "But Brian, I've already dusted off that bookcase." "Then I'll dust it off again for you." When he reached the appropriate bookcase, Han Shua started from the last row and started flipping through a book, carelessly throwing his brush to the side. When he had been observing the jade box last night, Han Shua's mental strength flowed curiously to the ball inside. This allowed him to vaguely sense the magical currents within the ball. The Han Shua of now wasn't a complete rookie when it came to magical knowledge, and naturally understood that magical currents indicated that the ball was some kind of magical object. This was why he came searching for the ball's origins within the library. Unfortunately, Han Shua realized after perusing most of the books on magical items that these contained only simple descriptions of ordinary magical staffs, robes and jewelry. It wasn't what he wanted. He cleaned up the bookcase with some dejection and resignation, no longer holding out hope for answers here. He then moved to the bookcases holding books on necromancy. Since he had made his way to the library, he couldn't very well leave empty-handed. He should bring at least one book back for further study, Han Shua mused as he started browsing through the books. The books at the top of the bookcases dealt with higher-level magic, he wouldn't understand them even he took them home. Therefore, he turned his attention to the lower level. A book of The Description of Dark Creatures caught his eye. He flipped through a few pages and discovered that it recorded some of the particulars of summoning dark creatures. Happy at heart, Han Shua immediately went to find Jack and waved The Description of Dark Creatures at Jack. He chuckled, "Jack, I'm taking this book back for further study. Cover for me, don't let other people find out." He didn't wait for Jack to respond and happily stuffed the book into his clothes, grabbed the brush he discarded earlier, and left the library. Chapter 22. Earn some spending money. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Time flew. Half a month had passed by in a blink of an eye. This half of a month was one of the most relaxing periods of time that Han Shua had ever had. The cleaning duties that had originally belonged to him were taken care of by Borg and Carrie. And because Han Shua's back was injured, Fanny didn't come looking for him to conduct more research. Han Shua learned from Jeff that even Fitch had gone in again to give the Adept Mage qualification trials another go. Therefore, this major enemy was temporarily not a threat. Noel.n Ever since Han Shua's shameless confession of love at the bottom of the trap, Lisa's attitude towards Han Shua had undergone a drastic change. Not only did she not pick on Han Shua anymore, but she often protected him, forbidding other students to practice necromancy magic on him. Given the situation, apart from eating, sleeping, drinking and showering, Han Shua spent all the rest of his free time on practicing magic and studying the foundations of necromancy, and the descriptions of dark creatures. To be honest, the injuries on Han Shua's back had long since healed, thanks to him practicing magic. There wasn't even a scar left anymore. The current Han Shua had grown another 2 centimeters, and was now 170 centimeters, thanks to practicing magic and sufficient nutrition from rations. His previous weak beyond belief body had started to slowly firm up and increase in strength. There were even muscles forming on his chest and arms. Unbeknownst to anyone else, Han Shua's body and strength had slowly changed without anyone knowing. He had also progressed to the crucial point of training for the mystical glacial spellfire. When Han Shua circulated his magical yuan, he could proceed according to the spell's instructions, and bring his magical yuan to the palms of his hands. Whenever Han Shuo started up the mystical glacial spell fire and circulated his magical yuan to his left and right palm, he could feel that the center of his palms respectively turned glacially cold and searingly hot. The surface of his skin would be tinged faint purple and red, causing the center of his hands to look quite odd. Han Shuo didn't dare do anything rash with the weird jade box in the meantime. He was deathly afraid that last time's situation would happen again. He was temporarily unwilling to take that kind of risk again before he got a handle on what the round ball was and its purpose. Thanks to studying the descriptions of dark creatures over the past 2 weeks, Han Shuo had a much clearer understanding of the particulars of summoning specific dark creatures. He also understood how to communicate with them, and how to send them back to the other dimension. However, even though the incantation for sending a summoned dark creature back to the other dimension was recorded in the description of dark creatures, and Han Shuo believed that he was absolutely capable of doing so with his current level of mental strength, he didn't dare take action. This was because he wasn't sure if he could summon the little skeleton again if he sent it back to the other dimension. The black skeleton with 7 bone spurs was the result of Han Shuo's painstaking refinement according to the methods of refining a demonic treasure. Not only was it superior in all aspects to ordinary skeletons, but it had a scary immunity to light magic. Han Shuo had spent his days and nights with the little skeleton during this time. It had also helped Han Shuo greatly, causing Han Shuo to grow attached to it. He was worried that if he sent it to the other dimension, he would lose it forever if he was unable to summon it next time. It was because of this concern that although Han Shuo was confident he would be able to send it back to the other dimension, he still hesitated to do so. He'd rather have the little skeleton live under his bed, resolutely keeping it even when that meant running the risk of discovery by others. The little black skeleton was lazily lying in a wooden bucket, its bones as black as ink and glowing with a faint haze. In the past 2 weeks, Han Shuo had often injected magical yuan into the bucket, continuing to refine it according to the magical yin concentration matrix. Under Han Shuo's continual refinement, the little skeleton's body became more and more agile and strong. Its bone dagger was actually even stronger than ordinary knives and swords. Han Shuo had once experimented with a piece of broken bone, and discovered that the broken bone had been immediately cut in half when the bone dagger had sliced down. As the little skeleton underwent changes, so did Han Shuo benefit from training in the solid realm. His body also received a mysterious makeover. The only thing was, Han Shuo had still been unable to break through this demonic realm level. He carefully went through old Fart Chu Songlan's memories, adding some of his reflections on what had happened recently, and came to one conclusion: if he wanted to quickly reach perfection in the solid realm, breaking things was the most effective and efficient way. Whenever Han Shuo had been severely beaten, or suffered injuries on his body would quickly repair itself through magic training. And every time after recovery, his body would be more stronger than before. His skin and bones would be more resilient. It was only after damage and injury that his progress in the solid realm would pick up. When he thought through this point, Han Shuo gave an involuntary ironic smile. This kind of magic training was death by masochism. But since he had started on this path, he had to find a way to quickly break through the solid realm in order to gain more strength and power. On this day, Han Shuo's figure appeared at the doors of the martial arts school of the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force. After a few days of gathering information, Han Shuo understood that a place for cultivating warriors and knights existed within this school. However, the warriors and knights were trained separately. The ranks of the warrior students were mostly filled with commoners. Their training mostly consisted of practicing their fighting aura and being instilled with notions of loyalty to their liege. The students within the school of knights mostly came from noble families, and was a training field for the powerful families and military forces, as well as the royal sons of the empire. These students hailed from uncommon origins and had varying degrees of influence within their families. Not only did they practice their fighting aura, but they were also here to learn the manners and graces of the nobility, strategies of war and art of command. These students absorbed a variety of knowledge within the School of Knights, all for the purpose of obtaining a good opportunity in the future, whether in their family or within the empire. The families of these knight students were all rather wealthy, and on the path of becoming a senior knight, did not bat an eye spending money to hire a few commoners for use in practicing battle and martial arts techniques. A few commoners who felt they possessed tough bodies would take the pummeling in return for money and rich rewards. Even a few warrior students would become willing human targets in return for money. However, it wasn't an easy task to earn this money. Knight students would sometimes miscalculate and even beat a few human targets to death. But because this was a mutually agreed, both sides willing transaction that the knight students had paid for, no one cared if the human targets were beaten to death. They were asking for it, after all. Han Shoa had come here to become one of the human targets. But he wasn't in it for the money, he wanted to temper his body in order to break through the solid realm. Numerous human targets stood within a spacious lobby. Each was strong and fit, all wearing the grubby clothing of poor commoners. Han Shoa concentrated his attention for a moment and discovered some warrior students mixed into the crowd. Some had been drawn in by the academy's reputation, and some were students from the warrior school. You're an errand boy for the academy. But your body isn't very strong, and you're not a warrior. You're asking for death coming here. Little fellow, let me advise you to avoid pursuing this pay, otherwise you could really be beaten to death. A thin old man said to Han Shoa as he looked over from the doors at the front of the lobby. Old man Jeff was 50-some years old, and in the same occupation as Han Shoa. He wore an errand boy's clothes and was in charge of registering the human targets. He had some misgivings about the frailty of Han Shoa's body and so tried to persuade Han Shoa out of kindness. No worries, Mr. Jeff, please register me. I'd like to try. Han Shoa looked at Jeff and spoke sincerely. Since you insist, I'll register you. AI. Do you think this is easy money? If you really are beaten to death, don't blame me for not warning you. Upon seeing Han Shoa was still insistent after a few attempts, and that others behind in the line were impatiently calling out, Jeff gave up trying to convince Han Shoa and agreed, putting down Brian in the register. A few other human targets looked at him oddly when Han Shoa walked in through the doors. The eyes of most were filled with disdain, and the kind-hearted few wore expressions of pity and regret, even trying to convince Han Shoa not to try. Although Han Shoa's body was a bit stronger than before due to practicing magic, he was still quite a ways off from the burly men whose arms were thicker than his thighs. Brian had been all skin and bones like a skinny monkey, and Han Shoa was only marginally stronger in comparison. Listen to me, leave while you still can, otherwise you'll surely be beaten to death. As Han Shoa took in his surroundings, a thin, 20-some-year-old youth walked over to Han Shoa and tried to persuade him. This youth wore the clothes of a warrior student. Even though his body didn't look too well built either, he was undoubtedly much stronger than those who looked strong on the outside, but hadn't practiced any martial arts technique simply because he was a warrior student. Thank you, I want to try. Han Shoa flashed a friendly smile and spoke lightly as he nodded at the youth. I'm called Cal, and I come here often to earn some extra money. Even though I'm a sergeant knight, I've still suffered serious injuries before. I've seen too many who were beaten to death because they wanted to earn some money, so I hope you can take my advice. Leave while you still can, otherwise you'll truly regret it. Cal looked at Han Shoa with sincerity, dissuading Han Shoa with a face of genuity. Han Shoa smiled and shook his head, I'm called Brian. Very nice to meet you, Cal. I'm grateful for your good intentions, but I must try. Cal gave an involuntary sigh upon seeing Han Shoa's determination, and shook his head without saying anything. Cal's gaze, however, was full of pity, as if he felt that Han Shoa was surely dead without a doubt. Chapter 23. This kid's a bit strong. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Alright, our noble future knights are coming this way. Good luck. Jeff suddenly yelled loudly as Han Shoa and Cal were talking. More than 10 colorfully dressed knight students wearing exquisite swords walked in through the lobby doors following Jeff's announcement. Most of them were teenage boys, with an exceedingly few amount of young girls. They cast arrogant looks in judgment, sizing up the human targets in the lobby. The warriors in the lobby were the first to be noticed. These guys had much more strength than the average person, and would be the most beneficial in terms of real combat experience. They were thus naturally the first to draw attention. The group of warriors that Cal headed up were the first to be targeted by the students. As the crowd of students haggled over an acceptable price, the group of warriors were led away for practice at the training field. Cal was one of them, and he cast a regretful glance from afar at Han Shoa as he left. Warriors were the strongest out of all the human targets, and the most useful for knight students in terms of actual combat practice. If knight students wished to hire them, then the amount they would have to pay would naturally be far above that of ordinary, burly commoner. L.C. After the warrior human targets, who had been mixed throughout the lobby, had been hired away as first pick, those remaining were all commoners. Of those, the ones who were brawny and stocky became the first to be selected. Some flexed their huge muscles, showing off bodybuilding poses that screamed "I'm so strong, my muscles are awesome." They wore fawning smiles as they looked at the future knights, hoping to be selected and receive rich compensation in return. Han Shoa's body was unremarkable to begin with, and being completely obscured by a crowd of tall and strong muscle men, he was taken even less seriously. Han Shoa started to become secretly anxious as he saw the knight students pick their targets and leave one by one. The three muscle men next to him were standing in three different directions, almost completely covering him. The knight students probably couldn't even see him. As Han Shoa fretted, he also tried to find a way to stand out. "Hi, big guy, excuse me." Han Shoa patted the 2-meter mountain of flesh ahead of him and flashed a friendly smile. The brawny man's skin was copper-colored, and his back was a sturdy frame. Muscles rippled through his 2-meter-tall height, like a bodybuilder who Han Shoa had seen before. When he heard Han Shoa speak, the man turned around and glared at Han Shoa with a vicious look. His right bicep muscle abruptly curled and tensed, forming a small mountain of flesh. He then laughed coldly in pride, and turned his head without another word. So what if you have big muscles?" Han Shoa also gave a cold laugh internally and reached out with his left hand. He placed it on the man's waist, and suddenly pushed forward hard. Don din din. The big muscle man stumbled and staggered forward 3 steps following the inrush of the force from Han Shoa's strong push. The lobby was already extremely crowded thanks to the presence of many mountains of flesh. People around him were shoved against their will when this person suddenly came crashing in. The area in front of Han Shoa immediately became quite chaotic. "Damn it, Daniel, do you want to break the rules?" The other mountains of flesh, that had been body slammed by the mountain of flesh called Daniel, roared furiously after steadying himself. "It wasn't me. It was the kid behind me." Daniel protested his innocence to the burly man beside him, and immediately glared at Han Shoa ferociously, saying coldly, "Kid, do you want to die early?" At this moment, Han Shoa had already taken advantage of the situation to slip out and occupy one of the better positions on the other side of the lobby. Upon hearing Daniel's words, Han Shoa gave a cold laugh and also stretched out his right hand, making the same bodybuilding pose that Daniel had just made. He flexed his biceps and made an "I'm so strong" gesture, cocking an eyebrow and gazing at Daniel provocatively. A few additional knight students walked in suddenly and was about to pick the human targets in the back. They all halted their motions of hiring and looked over in interest, when they realized that there seemed to be something interesting going on. Han Shoa had arrogantly struck such an outrageous pose because he had seen these new knight students walk in. Based on Han Shoa's body condition, it would be a bit difficult to be chosen out of the crowd. Trying to gain attention with his body and self-boasting would also most likely not amount to much. The fastest shortcut was to use tyrannical strength to rout a mountain of flesh. Only then would the night students change their minds about him. Except, even though Han Shoa had struck a cocky, provocative pose, he was still an idiot in the eyes of others. If a mountain of flesh like Daniel had made such a gesture, it would have naturally been quite intimidating. But, when a 170 centimeters tall and thin Han Shoa strutted arrogantly amongst so many mountains of flesh, one could only say, ridiculous, courting death. Ha, kid, since you seek death, I'll send you on your way. Daniel did not immediately erupt into a full-blown rage when faced with Han Shoa's provocation, but was rather delighted. He laughed loudly, raised an arm thicker than Han Shoa's thigh and grabbed for Han Shoa. In the lobby, fights often broke out between human targets seeking to distinguish themselves and attract the attentions of a rich and powerful night student. This was a common sight. Daniel was naturally happy instead of angry when he saw that Han Shoa's reckless provocation was playing right into his plans. He would be able to use this kid to prove his aggressiveness and ferocity in front of the night students. Except, muscular and fierce people were usually all brawn and no brains. Daniel had given no thought to how much strength Han Shoa would have needed, with his body condition, in order to push Daniel forcefully from the piles of flesh and even cause those he'd crashed into to stagger as well. The errand boy in charge of registering names, Jeff, couldn't bear to see Daniel reach towards Han Shoa and called out involuntarily, "Daniel, he's an errand boy for the students. You can't harm him seriously." "I will." Daniel smiled in response and didn't slow his right hand, still going towards Han Shoa. A few human targets with good intentions and some of the Kinder Night students winced in anticipation. Some of the young female night students even screamed in fear. Just as Daniel's meaty hand was about to fall upon Han Shoa's head, Han Shoa's body suddenly shifted from the position he had been standing in, causing Daniel's incoming hand to grasp at this air. Han Shoa also laughed weirdly at this moment, as if mocking Daniel's incompetence. He stuck out his left arm again, and curled his left bicep with the same posture. His right finger pointed at the small muscle that had flexed on his bicep and nodded towards Daniel. His meaning was apparently even though he hadn't said a word. "See, I'm strong. Ah, this kid is really cocky. Provocation, absolute provocation. Ha, interesting fellow." A stream of exclamations came out of mouths of the human targets and night students. When they saw that Han Shoa hadn't been caught, they took things one step further and struck ridiculous poses themselves, further heightening general interest. Even a few night students, who had been negotiating prices with some other human targets, temporarily halted their conversations and focused their attention on Han Shoa. "Kid, how dare you insult me? I'm gonna get you today." Daniel's face burned bright red, like a spontaneously enraged bull. The night students standing around him were his sources of fortune. Daniel's fury was utterly inflamed by such naked humiliation. Judging from the way he looked, he had most likely long forgotten Jeff's words of caution. As Daniel spoke, his eyes spat out fire and his hands formed fists of iron as he glared vehemently at Han Shoa. He brought them crashing down towards Han Shoa, wanting to violently damage Han Shoa's body instead of grabbing him. To outsiders, this punch was worlds apart from Daniel's previous action, whether in terms of speed or strength. This indicated that Daniel was truly furious this time. If Han Shoa was really hit, he would be gravely injured, if not dead outright. Those who had previously paid attention to the proceedings out of the kindness of their hearts started to worry for Han Shoa again. Seeing that the attack was about to reach him, Han Shoa pushed off his heels and twisted his body, somehow miraculously dodging Daniel's iron fist's attack. When Daniel struck empty air, his body followed through the action and stumbled forward a good distance. The human targets in his path, who had been watching the show, all scrambled backwards in panic, fearful of being embroiled in the mess. Han Shoa on the other hand had created circles in front of his chest with his two arms, pointing his fists upwards and puffing out his chest. With a trace of a disdainful smile at the corner of his lips, he had once again struck a provocative bodybuilder pose. A string of astounded noises suddenly emitted from the onlookers. The night students originally had the attitude of watching a good show started unconsciously treating Han Shuo seriously. The first evasion could perhaps be explained as a fluke, but Han Shuo still successfully dodged Daniel's attacks after the latter had increased the speed and strength of his iron fists. This could no longer be explained by luck. As everyone was marveling in astonishment, Daniel was like a crazy violent beast. His eyes bloodshot, his body shot forward again, like the wind accompanied by a roar of rage, reaching out with both hands and seeking to smash Han Shuo into pulp. Miracles kept materializing as Han Shuo kept avoiding Daniel's attacks. He was as cunning as a fish, and his speed exceedingly swift as well. He even had the breathing space to continuously strike all sorts of bizarre and unique bodybuilding poses. Han Shuo's actions were absolutely a naked provocation, an outrageous flaunting. Wow, he's so strong. Those insulting poses never repeat, I've never seen anything like it. A female knight exclaimed in surprise. This kid's a bit strong. A male knight student exclaimed in surprise. Daniel's in a spot of trouble this time. A mountain of flesh exclaimed in surprise. The entire lobby was in an uproar. Chapter 24. First bucket of gold. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Damn it, I'm going to kill you. Daniel roared explosively. He was thoroughly crazed, and began to attack Han Shuo fiercely, as if he was going to drag Han Shuo down to hell with him. But Han Shuo was like a sturdy canoe in the middle of a furious ocean. It seemed like it would capsize at any moment, but it somehow resolutely clung on unharmed. By now, everyone fully acknowledged Han Shuo's evasion speed. No one thought that Han Shuo's previous dodges had been out of luck now. Those who had been worried about him now wore carefree smiles. Even Jeff crossed his arms and was laughing merrily as he looked over. Finally, Daniel ran out of energy and stopped automatically, panting heavily. He angrily glared at Han Shuo, with sweat dripping down like rain, roaring, "Kid, take one of my hits if you have the guts to. What's the use in only dodging?" Daniel had only meant to vent an angry complaint, even he didn't think that Han Shuo would take a hit, but surprisingly, Han Shuo stopped his various bodybuilding poses and had the presence of mind to nod at Daniel, smiling, "No problem." Everyone revisited their opinions of Han Shuo after this response, with many displaying perplexed expressions. Han Shuo's body was thin and small, so it was understandable that he was nimble and agile, but no one believed that the frail Han Shuo, with no fighting aura, could hold his own in terms of strength against Daniel, an obvious muscle man. Even Daniel himself was gobsmacked by Han Shuo's response. He swiftly recovered and laughed wildly, "Good, good. You're the one who wants to die. You can't blame me." Daniel had always been proud of his strong body and ferocious strength. This had formed the basis of his earned power. Although it rankled his pride, Daniel could grudgingly accept that his speed and nimbleness didn't measure up to Han Shuo's. Now that a chance to display his awesome strength was in front of him, it was up to him to see if he could wipe away the previous humiliation with one blow. Daniel was naturally going to take full advantage of this opportunity. Gathering up his strength, Daniel propelled his right fist forward. The veins on his arm popped out as he increased his speed and strength to the limit, bringing his fist crashing down on Han Shuo. Han Shuo squinted his eyes a bit, a sinister coldness sparkling in their depths. They were like those of a viper, lying in wait for its prey, giving the feeling of poised cruelness. As Daniel's fist came flying towards his face, Han Shuo concentrated his magical yuan into his tightly clenched right fist and punched outwards in a head-on collision course with Daniel's iron fist. Pa! Daniel emitted a devastating scream, like a pig being slaughtered, as a crisp sound rang out. His entire right arm drooped, and the right fist, that had been tightly clenched moments earlier, was now curled in the shape of a chicken's claw, shaking madly with his right arm. The severeness within Han Shuo's eyes faded away, and a harmless smile reappeared on his face. He retracted the right fist that he'd just thrust out and shook his right arm slightly, looking at his fist in shock. He muttered to himself, I really took the hit. Daniel had put all his strength into that hit despite seeing Han Shuo's weak body. This wasn't simply teaching Han Shuo a lesson, but wanting to give him a death sentence, but the current Han Shuo was no longer a timid coward who dumbly accepted everything that flew his way. Although he sometimes played dumb, he naturally wouldn't be kind to someone who wanted to actually kill him. The bizarre outcome of their two fists meeting had completely stunned the lobby full of night students and human targets. A few of the nearby commoner human targets looked at Han Shuo now with just a trace of fear in their gazes. The people next to him automatically shied away, leaving the prime spot for him. All the night students were extremely excited and put their heads together in discussion. Some even suspected that Han Shuo was one of the rare barbarians on the continent, or an orc that had taken human form. Daniel was still wailing in pain as his right arm trembled continuously. Everyone understood what that crisp crack just now had meant. Daniel's right arm was most likely destroyed and useless. The old errand boy Jeff looked at Daniel regretfully and spoke soft words of comfort. Daniel, I'm sorry that this happened, but I'm afraid that your current body condition has disqualified you from staying here. Daniel involuntarily looked at Han Shuo in resentment upon hearing Jeff's words. He then brushed past Han Shuo and walked out of the lobby. Too many previous injuries had resulted from fights, thus a few rules had been laid down. Daniel understood his place and position. Add to that his clear understanding that he was no match for Han Shuo, his only option was to leave early. When Daniel had left, Jeff gave a great yell. All right, everyone can continue your negotiations. Multiple night students walked towards Han Shuo as soon as Jeff called out. All of them had fixed their gazes on him and were shouting, 1 gold coin. 2 gold coins. 3 gold coins. Under normal circumstances, according to their respective strength, a commoner human target could be hired for student practice for 10 to 50 silvers. Warriors with high potential could be hired for 1 to 5 gold coins depending on their level. The 2 or 3 gold coins that these people were offering were amazingly high amounts. Although Han Shuo had displayed his power just now, he still wasn't a warrior. A stronger warrior would have been able to use his fighting aura to deal a single, fatal blow to Daniel in the fight just now. Therefore, a price of 2 or 3 golds was an incredible price for a commoner human target. Han Shuo had been ready to accept when the first student had called out 1 gold coin, but when the subsequent price of 2 gold coins had appeared, Han Shuo shut his mouth with an audible click and awaited higher offers. Although he wasn't here for money, Han Shuo fully understood that money was just as important in this world as it was on Earth. He would definitely not settle for earning only 1 gold coin when he could earn 2. The night students all walked up to Han Shuo and called out increasingly higher bids. However, Han Shuo was still a commoner and not a warrior with surpassing strength. Therefore, these people mostly stopped after 2 or 3 gold coins. 5 gold coins. Han Shuo's patience had won a large sum for him. A handsome sergeant knight with golden curls, one who looked kind and humble, offered a price higher than the others. Most stopped bidding as soon as his offer of 5 gold coins appeared. They looked at him askance, and one of them said, Lawrence, a sergeant warrior is only worth 5 gold coins. Although this kid's a bit strong, he's definitely not worth 5 gold. Isn't your price a bit high? Lawrence smiled and said placidly, It's a bit high, but we've come a bit late and all of the good warriors have been hired anyway. There aren't many left, so we can only choose him. The others agreed as they pondered his words. Out of all the human targets left in the lobby, Han Shuo's strength was most likely the highest. If the warriors who had been here earlier were still here, then perhaps Han Shuo wouldn't have been worth this much, but now that he was the strongest here, the night students didn't have much choice. People were also impatient to find a sparring partner, thus further increasing Han Shuo's worth. How does 5 gold coins sound to this amazing friend? Lawrence smiled at Han Shuo and asked peacefully. Han Shuo realized that no one would continue to bid higher after looking around, and then proceeded to size up Lawrence as the strongest out of those present. He nodded, I accept. My name is Lawrence and here's 5 gold coins. I hope you can help me in our training later. Lawrence walked towards Han Shuo and took 5 gold coins out of a colorful pouch. Han Shuo was a bit emotional as he accepted the 5 gold coins. Brian had been sold to the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force for 5 gold coins back in the day. These 5 gold coins he'd earned for sparring with a night student were enough to buy back Brian's life. 5 gold coins was a heavenly price for Han Shuo's current position, it was enough for his freedom. I'm called Brian, nice to meet you. Han Shuo smiled urbanely at his fortune god Lawrence after he'd put the gold coins into his own ragged money pouch. Come with me and let me see if you're worth those 5 gold coins. Lawrence walked out decisively with Han Shuo following close behind. The training fields of the School of Martial Arts were quite similar to those of the School of Magic. However, the corners were filled with obstacles instead of magical items. There was only Han Shuo and Lawrence in the spacious training field. The ground was tiled with rough, hard rock and the surface was extremely hard to the touch. Lawrence changed into an athletic, white training uniform after entering the venue. He disarmed his sword, placing it to the side. Only then did he look at Han Shuo with some interest, smiling, those 5 gold coins aren't earned easily. Are you ready? Han Shuo inwardly thought that his body was worlds apart in toughness and strength from the original Brian, thanks to the forging from the magical yuan. Add to that the magical yuan's curious negating effect against fighting aura, and he wasn't that afraid of Lawrence damaging his body with fighting aura. There wasn't much to prepare, so he nodded at Lawrence. Remember, you're sparring and thus can only dodge or block, but cannot attack. It seemed that Lawrence could tell that Han Shuo was new at this, and issued some reminders before beginning. He only started slowly walking towards Han Shuo when he was satisfied that Han Shuo understood. Just as Lawrence was about to reach Han Shuo's side, his speed suddenly increased like lightning. His empty left hand was like a sharp sword being unsheathed, and it came rushing towards Han Shuo's chest. His fingers were arranged together and pointed towards Han Shuo. Due to training his fighting aura, a knight's strength and speed were completely beyond the realm of an ordinary burly commoner if he activated his fighting aura. Lawrence's onrushing hand was more than 10 times the speed and strength of Claude's from earlier. Han Shuo's eyes lost focus as he saw that Lawrence's hand was already near his chest. His heart spasmed in fright as his magical yuan started churning quickly. Han Shuo abruptly twisted his body and dodged to the side. Lawrence slashed open the front of Han Shuo's shirt with a clear ripping sound. Han Shuo felt a cold draft on his chest and saw his shirt flying away in the breeze. He felt relieved that he had managed to dodge in time. However, a large amount of force surged into his lower abdomen while Han Shuo was still inwardly celebrating. His body involuntarily staggered backwards as he sat down on the hard rock. His intestines and stomach felt like they'd been smashed together and it hurt quite a bit. He lifted his head to see that Lawrence's extended foot was still halted in midair. The student was looking at Han Shuo with a bantering look. Brian, I pulled my punches this time, and didn't keep attacking. I won't be as kind next time. Lawrence's kick just now had been infused with fighting aura. However, Lawrence had only employed his fighting aura to increase his body and attack speed, and had kept it contained within his body. He hadn't projected the fighting aura into Han Shuo's body for further damage. And it was because of this that the magical yuan within Han Shuo's body hadn't reacted. His physical body had taken the collision that had been filled with a crazy amount of strength. Even his improved body had taken damage. He nodded with his brows drawn tightly together. Han Shuo gritted his teeth against the pain from his stomach and stood up from the ground. He looked at Lawrence coldly. I'll be more careful from now on. Again. Chapter 25. Pain and happiness. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Lawrence looked at Han Shoa with some surprise, then smiled and said, "Very good." His body abruptly moved again, and he appeared in front of Han Shoa in the blink of an eye. He violently kicked out with his foot using lightning-like speed, still aiming for Han Shoa's stomach. Han Shoa had already taken a hefty kick to the stomach at this point in time and was in an exceeding amount of pain. He was well aware that Sergeant Knight Lawrence's attack speed and strength was not something that he, someone who hadn't even surpassed the solid realm of demonic practice, could fully defend against. But, for some reason, Han Shoa was wholly unafraid, and even felt a bit of eager anticipation. The magical yuan within his body circulated through his abdomen a few times, and he felt a quick abatement of pain. He concentrated like he never had before, and faced Lawrence's subsequent attacks calmly. Just as Lawrence's foot came flying his way, Han Shoa's feet had already pushed off and he backed up with haste, evading Lawrence's foot like lightning. However, Lawrence wasn't surprised in the least and his body didn't hesitate. He followed his empty kick with a string of punches and kicks, following Han Shoa's retreat and ferociously continued to attack Han Shoa. Lawrence was a sergeant-level knight, and could increase his body functions beyond a typical muscle man when he circulated his fighting aura to his energy and attack power. Even with Han Shoa's current agility, he still couldn't avoid being repeatedly hit. Polypola sounded continuously, as Han Shoa could only fully protect his face. That left his chest, waist, stomach, arms, and legs to suffer constant hits. The pain in his body increased as he started being hit multiple times. His evasion speed became more sluggish due to his overall body condition. He was hit with more attacks this way, and towards the end his two legs were as heavy as lead, and each movement required a monumental amount of effort. If it wasn't for the fact that Han Shoa had been constantly practicing magic and strengthening his body during this time, then based off Brian's weak and fragile body, he would have been dead within a minute of Lawrence's storm of attacks. When he'd faced Claude and Eric, both had sent their fighting aura directly into Han Shoa's body. The wild fighting aura had been enclosed by the magical yuan as soon as it had entered his body, preventing Han Shoa's body from suffering from too much damage. Han Shoa hadn't been seriously injured the 2 times he'd been hit by fighting aura, causing him to slightly overlook the warriors and knight, but now that he'd been subjected to such a thorough beating by Lawrence, Han Shoa finally understood how he'd been completely wrong before. He hadn't been hurt before purely due to the wondrous effects of the magical yuan. If it wasn't for the magical yuan, then his internal organs would have most likely have been completely destroyed as soon as the fighting aura entered his body. No wonder Claude was so taken aback when Han Shoa hadn't immediately died a grisly death when Claude sent his fighting aura into Han Shoa's body. This also explained why Eric confidently thought that Han Shoa was dead without a doubt, and didn't even bother checking Han Shoa's body. Lawrence used his fighting aura in a different way and didn't send it directly into Han Shoa's body to wreak havoc on his internal organs. On the contrary, Lawrence used it to increase the speed and strength of his attacks. This prevented the wondrous effects of the magical yuan and forced Han Shoa to passively take the hits with his physical body. Pa! The same foot stomped on Han Shoa's stomach again, and Han Shoa staggered backwards in retreat. He finally couldn't handle any more and once more fell heavily to the ground. The current Han Shoa had 2 broken ribs and numerous other injuries. Apart from his unharmed face, his entire body had suffered severe hits as it never had before. Han Shoa struggled with his body and kept trying to stand up, but would wobble back to the ground every time he tried. Each twist and movement of his body brought him great pain, but Han Shoa actually felt ecstasy at this moment. He could clearly feel that the magical yuan was circulating at a speed much faster than normal, and kept flowing through all his aches and pains, creating a strange, fiery sensation where his bones had been broken and wounds had been opened. Han Shoa understood that his previous conclusion had been correct. The fastest way to break through the solid realm was to break things. The magical yuan's abnormal circulations now continually repaired his broken body, and reforged his tendons, bones, muscles, and skin over and over again, causing his physical body to become tougher. Although his body hurt beyond belief, Han Shuo was quite satisfied. He grit his teeth and yelled brokenly while laughing grimly. He finally scrambled to his feet and stared at Lawrence in the eye. "I think our partnership can be continued for a long time." Lawrence stopped and stood in front of Han Shuo, frowning as he watched the latter struggle to his feet after falling again and again. As the attacker, Lawrence was well aware of the force of his attacks just now. Even an ordinary companion arms with the benefit of defending with fighting aura would not be able to take the hits like Han Shuo stubbornly did. What surprised Lawrence the most was that even after suffering these fierce attacks, Han Shuo could still laugh loudly in between screams of pain. Lawrence could hear from Han Shuo's laughs that the latter truly seemed to be filled with joy. Lawrence thought this was simply too incredible. When Han Shuo had mentioned a long-term partnership, Lawrence was dumbfounded at first, but then smiled lightly. "Brian, you're quite interesting, but a long-term partnership depends on your body and whether it can handle more attacks. To be honest, I haven't fully exerted myself today, nor have I used my sword. I have coins in abundance. If you still want to earn this money, you can come find me anytime. I will still offer the same price of 5 golds per session. What do you think?" Han Shuo nodded and responded, "No problem, I'll be back soon." "Good. Brian, you're a very interesting fellow, I hope you can recover quickly. My attacks next time will be even more vicious. Be prepared." Lawrence said as he changed out of his clothes, rearmed himself with his sword and left the training field. Han Shuo didn't leave immediately after Lawrence had departed. He instead sat down Indian style, and repeatedly circulated the magical yuan according to the principles of practicing magic, reforging his severely damaged body. After a while, he felt his drained energy slowly revive after repeated circulations of the magical yuan. His legs, that felt like they weighed a ton, also gradually regained some strength. Although he still hurt all over, pain seemed to be better than the complete lifelessness he had felt earlier. He grimaced as he moved, sensing the pain he was in. Han Shuo laughed loudly, holding up underneath the unending agony. He slowly stood up, then swaggered out of the training field. "Oh, it's Brian, are you all right?" Han Shuo heard others gasp in amazement as soon as he walked out of the training field. Upon swiveling his body, he realized that it was the kind-hearted young warrior, Cal, the one who had tried to talk Han Shuo out of it in the lobby. Cal's tight robes had some dust on it, and some traces of sweat beaded his forehead, but he seemed otherwise unharmed. "No big deal." Han Shuo smiled at Cal and responded faintly while nodding his head. Cal was a seasoned warrior and could tell with one glance that Han Shuo was not as unaffected as he said he was. Cal had a great deal of experience as a human target, and naturally understood that even if nothing showed in outward appearances, that didn't necessarily mean that the body was unharmed. The way that Han Shuo was walking, his expression all indicated that his body condition was quite bad. Cal quickly walked towards Han Shuo and reached out a hand to help steady Han Shuo. Cal frowned, "What, no big deal? Your body must be in awful shape. Here, let me take you back. Good thing you walked out alive, I thought you'd be beaten to death in there." Cal meant well, but Han Shuo was an errand boy for the necromancy major, and a crazy one at that. If he were to return with Cal, it was bound to create unnecessary complications. Besides, Han Shuo didn't want to owe anyone favors. Even though he felt terrible, he had to hold it in. He would be fine if he walked slowly. Therefore, Han Shuo brushed off Cal's steadying hand and smiled, "Thank you, Cal. I'm fine, really. I can go back by myself." Han Shuo turned to leave immediately after his words, but saw a familiar figure approaching from afar, Claude. A human target followed behind Claude, and they both approached the night student training fields. It looked like he was also here to spar with human targets. Han Shuo had been prepared to bump into Claude when he came to the school for knights. The last time at the Department of Light Magic, Han Shua's little skeleton had almost been pulverized by Claude, and he himself had suffered from Claude's fighting aura as well. If it wasn't for the magical yuan enclosing the fighting aura, he would most likely be dead by now. Claude had long since forgotten this matter, and didn't know that the Han Shua was the master of the little skeleton, but Han Shua had already noted this event for future revenge. Even though he was prepared to see Claude again, his body condition was at its worst at the moment and Han Shua had no desire to go head-to-head with Claude right now. If he'd guessed wrong and Claude was still harboring a grudge from last time, death was the only possible outcome for Han Shua if Claude took his revenge. Han Shua's mind frantically raced through ways to avoid Claude as the latter approached with a sunny smile, turning his head to hold a spirited conversation with other night students. Chapter 26. Entering a demonic mental state. You are listening at novelfull.audio. As Claude neared him, Han Shua grimaced and gave a low moan. He ducked his body and head and reached for his ankle, as if inspecting the injury to his ankle. Next to him, Cal frowned involuntarily as he saw Han Shua's actions. He propped Han Shua up with one hand and said, "Are you all right? Is your ankle injured? Let me take a look." "Nothing much, just that I twisted it a bit just now." Han Shua responded lowly with a drooped head and a bent-over body. Claude and the other night students had arrived by this time. The others had come later and did not recognize Han Shua. There were many present who were wounded or crippled, and so Han Shua's performance didn't attract too much attention. Claude flicked a glance at Han Shua and thought nothing of it, passing by Han Shua as he chatted and laughed with his peers. Han Shua's ankle was indeed twisted, and had swollen up by now. Cal gave a soft gasp upon seeing it. "It's swollen up so much, let me take you home." Seeing that Claude's footsteps were going further away, Han Shua stood up straight again and wiggled his ankle, spinning off his toes. He smiled at Cal. "I suddenly feel much better." "Thank you Cal, no worries about taking me back." Han Shua's walking pace picked up after he finished speaking, and he quickly disappeared around the corner without a trace or making another sound. Cal shook his head, his face utterly perplexed as he watched Han Shua suddenly become hale and hearty. What a weird person. Han Shua dragged his battered body back to the necromancy major of the School of Magic when the sky was about to turn dark. Now that his necromancy errand duties had been taken over by Carrie and Borg, Han Shua didn't need to expend too much effort. He lined up for his dinner after returning and went directly to the warehouse. He immediately started using the magical yuan to continually rebuild and reforge his body after he'd locked the door. There wasn't a single inch of his body that didn't cry out in pain. His skin, tendons and bones had all suffered severe damage. The magical yuan circulated his body again and again according to the principles of practicing magic. Han Shua could feel a bit of his strength return from the fiery mass of pain that was his current body each time the magical yuan completed a circulation. The magical yuan churned continuously throughout the process, and it seemed to have grown just a tad bigger, bringing a new surprise to Han Shua. It looked like the time and effort spent on strengthening his body was also a process of gradual improvement for the magical yuan. He would have to endure this kind of injury in the near future in order to fortify his body. The pain in his body eased up after midnight and Han Shua switched to practicing the mystical glacial spellfire at this time. He circulated the magical yuan to his fingertips and palms of his hands according to the instructions of the mystical glacial spellfire. Time flew as Han Shua sank into a strange, oblivious mindset. There were no distractions in his mind, just the perseverance and tenacity to train. He had long since forgotten the pain and injuries of his body, and just kept circulating his magical yuan according to method prescribed by the mystical glacial spellfire. Han Shua had previously restrained himself when practicing magic. He would awaken at a set time, and had never immersed himself like he had today. Han Shua had lost himself in it today, forgetting the passage of time, forgetting his sense of self, forgetting all mundane distractions. Bam! The small door to the warehouse suddenly banged open, startling Han Shoa out of his reverie. He frowned and his eyes shot like cold lightning to Jack's body. Jack shuddered in fright under Han Shoa's stare, only exhaling softly when he saw the cold lightning in Han Shoa's eyes fade away. "Brian, so you really were in the warehouse? I thought something happened to you." Han Shoa immediately checked his body's condition after being startled awake. He suddenly realized that his originally heavily injured body had mostly healed, and that the magical yuan circulating within his body was a bit stronger than before. His mental strength also showed more clarity than before. What could happen to me? I only slept in one day, that's all. Borg and Carrie are cleaning for me anyway, there's nothing to do. Han Shoa cracked his stiff neck as creaking noises sounded. When Han Shoa got up from the small wooden bed and stretched his body, all the bones in his body sounded with crisp pa-pa sounds, leaving Jack dumbfounded where he stood. After a while, Jack finally reacted in surprise when the strange sounds had disappeared from Han Shoa's body. He called out involuntarily, Brian, you didn't sleep in for just a day. You haven't appeared in 6 days. I knocked on your door for a long time without any response from you, I thought something happened to you." Han Shoa was also astounded by Jack's words. Had he trained for 6 whole days? He creased his brow and then suddenly recalled the mention of entering a demonic mental state within Chu Tsonglan's memories of demonic magic. Some practitioners would be able to enter a demonic mental state due to fortuitous coincidence. It varied accordingly, and the demonic mental state was further split into either an aggressive or passive state. Some practitioners' minds and disposition would drastically change upon entering the demonic mental state, and they would thirst for and feast on blood and murder. Their bodies would feel no pain, and both their magic and physical body would be greatly enhanced upon entering the demonic mental state. They would be unable to pause for even a second, and would only seek to continuously destroy everything and everyone in front of them. This was the aggressive type of a demonic mental state. The other kind was what Han Shoa had experienced earlier, suddenly entering a demonic mental state during practice. It was a vague, foggy process undetectable by the practitioner, but his internal processes and magical yuan circulation would be greatly heightened compared to typical training conditions. He wouldn't be able to sense his own training status, but would be able to discern a huge change within his body when he awoke. The first type of demonic mental state ordinarily occurred after the rational mind had lost itself due to severe interference. If the practitioner didn't die in the course of the endless killings spurred on by the demonic state, his body's energies would be greatly harmed along with other side effects. Han Shoa's peaceful demonic state was the much better option. Most entered this bizarre mental realm during training, and could feel the increase in their strength when they awoke. Oh, that's because I've been a bit sleepy lately and slept too deeply. Right, what do you need me for? Han Shoa realized that his stomach felt empty as he spoke, and immediately understood that his body greatly needed food and nutrition after going 6 days without eating. Jack withdrew a large piece of bread for Han Shoa as he looked at Han Shoa rub his stomach. I was worried about you, and Master Fanny told me to tell you to go to her lab. Oh yes, Lisa was asking about you too. I don't know if she wants to make trouble for you again. I see. I'll go to Master Fanny's first. Let's go. Han Shoa munched on Jack's bread as he walked out of the warehouse. It was a good thing that Han Shoa had shoved the little skeleton underneath the bed during this time. Jack hadn't seen anything amiss when he'd barged in. After he relocked the door that Jack had come crashing through, Han Shoa made straight for Fanny's lab. Knock knock knock. Han Shoa stood at the entrance to Fanny's lab and raised his hand to knock. Come in. Fanny's gentle and soft voice sounded from the lab. Han Shoa opened the door and stepped into the lab upon hearing it. Several magic scrolls were placed on the pedestal in the middle of the lab. Mysterious and exquisite magic words and diagrams were tattooed on the scrolls. Even someone who had just set foot into the halls of magic, a rookie like Han Shoa, could feel the strong magical currents from the scrolls from a far distance away. At that moment, Fanny was chanting an incantation as she bent over, tracing beautiful lines on the magic scrolls as she dipped a long, elegant nail into the brown magic solution to the side. Those delicate lines looked random, but also gave a wondrous feeling of extreme harmony. Fanny finished outlining the scroll after a while and injected magic into the scroll after reciting an incantation. A desolate, lonely and dark aura immediately started emanating from it as a dash of brown light flashed over the scroll. It then rolled itself up automatically. When she had stored the finished magic scroll, Fanny lifted her head and smiled involuntarily. "Oh, it's Brian. How's your back doing?" "Thank you for your concern, Master Fanny. The injuries on my back are all healed." Han Shuo nodded and responded. Han Shuo understood he couldn't continue to play the fool. Although doing so would bring some benefits to him, it would create more trouble sooner or later. Since that was the case, it would be better to slowly change himself, and let everyone unknowingly accept his new self. Therefore, people wouldn't find it surprising that he had changed, and would actually think that he had suddenly seen reason again after being crazy. The previous owner this body, Brian, had suffered greatly in the necromancy major. Han Shuo had vowed to take revenge for Brian when he climbed out of that tomb. A lesson had been more or less taught to Carrie, Borg, Bach and Lisa, enacting quite a bit of revenge for Brian. Han Shuo still remained in the necromancy major in order to lay the groundwork for future plans. After gaining a better understanding of this world, Han Shuo realized that he would have to continuously become stronger if he wanted to thrive in this world. The Babylon Academy of Magic and Force was a place to continually improve himself. He remained here in order to take advantage of the school's resources to further raise all aspects of himself, including strength, knowledge, and a full understanding of this world. Therefore, Han Shuo knew that he couldn't continue to be crazy, and needed to change himself bit by bit. "Oh, that's wonderful. We're just about to take a field trip and bring students to the outside world. They will be testing themselves on the development of their magic. Come with us. You can pick up after them, and I can take a good gauge of your body condition on the road. What do you say, Brian?" Fanny put down the items she held in her hand and smiled at Han Shuo. Han Shuo stood motionless, thought for a bit and felt that this was a chance. He nodded involuntarily, sure. Chapter 27. Hot damn, I'm awesome. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Alright, then we set off in 2 days. Use these next few days to prepare. As for your errand duties, I'll ask the school authorities to temporarily hand them over to the other 3, so no worries there. Fanny smiled charmingly upon seeing Han Shuo agree. Her beautiful face was even more tempting and moving because of her smile, making Han Shuo's heart lurch slightly. Before he'd arrived in Brian's body, Han Shuo's life could be categorized as a failure. Not only had he accomplished nothing professionally speaking, but his love life had also been in shambles. He still didn't know anything about being with a woman, to this day. Once he came to this world, Han Shuo's self-control had decreased and his various desires had increased due to practicing magic. Han Shuo was someone who died once before. The depressing and pointless morass of his past life had completely bound his past self. Adding to that was the weight of his family and his shy personality, which had resulted in him never daring to act on the evil thoughts that he dreamed up. And now, in this completely foreign world, with his increasing strength due to practicing magic, many of his previous constraints had disappeared. He naturally wished to live without regrets and fully materialize all the daydreams that had always been buried in his inner heart. And women, particularly beautiful women, had been an uncontrollable urge in Han Shuo's heart. Fanny was not only beautiful and mesmerizing, she also paid particular attention to Han Shuo's well-being, and he was at the age that desired the fairer sex most ardently. He would naturally have unavoidable desires. With the principles of demonic magic demanding that a practitioner do as he wished, Han Shuo naturally viewed Fanny as the prey of his affections. Master Fanny, are the dark creatures we summon always different? Is it possible to summon the same creature after sending it back to the other dimension? Since Han Shoa had promised Fanny to accompany them on their outing, he started making preparations for his own affairs. Han Shoa had no advantages besides his summoned small skeleton that he could rely on. Although he could still contact the skeleton within a certain range, it would likely be difficult to remain in contact with the current level of his mental strength once he set out, and they were separated by a vast distance. If the little skeleton got into any trouble because Han Shoa wasn't here to control it with his mental strength, then things would get sticky. Although Han Shoa was confident that he'd be able to send the little skeleton back to the other dimension, he didn't know if he would be able to summon it again. Therefore, he wanted to solve this problem before setting out. As the teacher for the necromancy major, Fanny would naturally know more about these things. Just because Han Shoa had no way of solving his conundrum did not mean Fanny didn't, hence his questions. Fanny looked at Han Shoa in confusion as soon as his question was asked. Her sexy, full lips moved as she asked, Brian, why are you asking these questions? These are things that necromancy students should pay attention to. You shouldn't care about these things. Oh, this is Lisa's question. I was just asking you for her. Han Shoa nodded and spoke with a good Samaritan expression. Fanny didn't suspect a thing after Han Shoa's response. She understood that Lisa often practiced necromancy magic on Han Shoa and thus, it made sense for Lisa to ask a question through Han Shoa. She thought for a while and then said, so that's the case. It's not that one can't summon the same creature after sending it to the other dimension, it's just that there's no need to do so. Every time a dark creature is summoned from the other dimension, it, or a group, is merely chosen at random from a crowd of similar level dark creatures according to the mental strength powering the incantation, and the chant itself. Because they are the same level of dark creature, their strength is roughly the same, and thus no one cares about these matters. Then what should be done in order to resummon the same dark creature after it's been sent back to the other dimension? Han Shoa thought quickly and asked a follow-up question. Fanny carefully put away the magic scrolls on the pedestal and ran her beautiful, long fingers over the top of the pedestal. She frowned as she explained, if you really want to resummon a dark creature sent back to the other dimension, then leave a magical brand on its body. Lock onto the original dark creature through the magical brand the next time you summon it. You can find the original creature this way and resummon it out of the other dimension. Han Shoa's heart was immediately overjoyed upon hearing Fanny's words, but his forehead creased in a frown as he muttered to himself. So that's the case, I wonder if Lisa knows how to leave a magical brand on a summoned dark creature. After looking at Han Shoa oddly, Fanny smiled and said softly. Brian, you truly are a very kind person. I know that Lisa has not been the friendliest to you, and the problems with your body resulted from her agony of the soul. Yet not only do you not carry a grudge, but you constantly think about her. There are few as pure and kind-hearted as you these days. Pure. Kind-hearted, Han Shoa was speechless internally, but maintained an honest smile on his face. He scratched his head and said with some embarrassment, I don't think a grudge should be carried, no matter the reason. People will understand if you treat them kindly. Heh. Fanny laughed softly and nodded as she heard Han Shoa's words, and said no more. She took out a thin piece of yellow paper from a nearby cabinet, and picked up a quill with her slender fingers, dipping it in ink and quickly scratching out something. After a short while, Fanny had filled the thin paper with words, and she stuck the quill back into the inkpot. She handed the text-filled, thin paper to Han Shoa and smiled, this is the incantation method for leaving a magical brand on a summoned dark creature. Give it to Lisa, I think she will know what to do with her capacity as a novice mage. Elated, Han Shoa almost shook as he accepted the paper from Fanny. He nodded with a dumb smile, saying eagerly, I'll go immediately, Lisa will be very happy. Han Shoa left Fanny's lab at an eager pace, clutching the thin paper in his hands as soon as he'd finished speaking. What an innocent little fellow. I hope that Lisa makes less trouble for him in the future because of this. Fanny smiled slightly and said with some emotion upon seeing Han Shuo leave so urgently. Midnight, the cemetery behind the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force. O endless darkness, turn into destructive bone arrows, and destroy according to my will, bone arrows. A cuttingly sharp bone arrow materialized out of thin air as a lowly chanted incantation finished. Accompanied by a strident whooshing sound, it connected violently with the chest of the straw figure in front of it. I've finally successfully released a bone arrow. Han Shuo laughed loudly and called out with pride after seeing that the bone arrow had neither broken in midair nor had been off course. A lot of time had passed since the incident that had occurred at the cemetery last time. Han Shuo resumed his practice of the bone arrow magic whenever he was certain that no one would pay attention to the place. During this time, his mental strength had increased at a rapid pace, particularly after the encounter with the strange ball. Since he hadn't succumbed to that great calamity, Han Shuo's mental strength had greatly increased. After repeated practice and enhanced magical knowledge, Han Shuo had finally mastered the low-level necromancy magic of bone arrow to perfection, without any mistakes. The little skeleton stood at attention in the distance, its empty eye sockets vigilantly patrolling the four corners as its head swiveled. It grasped the bone dagger with its right hand, and glowed with a cold, dark light under the moonlight. He would be temporarily leaving the academy for the outside world tomorrow with Fanny and company. The fact that Han Shuo had used Lisa's name to ask Fanny some questions never came to light. After all, this was just a small matter, and Fanny wasn't someone who would ask about every little detail. She naturally forgot this issue after 1 or 2 days. Over the past couple of days, Han Shuo studied the foundations of necromancy and the descriptions of dark creatures, as well as thoroughly reading and contemplating the words on Fanny's thin paper. He was confident that he would be able to leave a magical brand on the little skeleton. He planned to do so before he left on the morrow, and started to plant a magical brand on the little skeleton according to his understanding. The little skeleton patrolling off in the distance came speeding towards Han Shuo with a yank of his mental strength. The 7 bone spurs on its back fluttered slightly in the air, seeming to add a bit of power, and causing the little skeleton's body to actually lift above the ground for a bit as it ran. This surprised Han Shuo, thinking that his efforts in refining the skeleton had not been in vain. It was apparent that just like him, its strength had continued to increase. When the little skeleton came to a stop next to Han Shuo, he gathered his concentration in a way he never had before, curling his fingers upwards in the air. He then started to lowly recite the incantation found in Fanny's notes. My loyal servant, in the name of the summoner, I leave upon you my eternal mark. Dark seal. Han Shuo suddenly felt his mental strength drain rapidly away upon conclusion of the incantation, and an inky black aura the size of a fist formed between his hands. The mental strength needed by this dark seal was more than what he'd anticipated. It was only then that Han Shuo remembered something he'd overlooked: Lisa was a novice mage, and he was just a magic apprentice. Fanny's method had most likely been tailored for Lisa's mental strength, and hadn't even considered the fact that a magic apprentice would be the one casting it. Han Shuo felt his headache fiercely as his mental strength was spontaneously depleted. He was involuntarily shocked by the feeling of something being drained away. At this moment, the aura between his 2 hands abruptly drifted out, sinking into the little skeleton's body between its 2 empty eye sockets. At the same time, Han Shuo felt extremely fatigued and sat heavily on the ground, panting heavily as he did so. Suddenly, it was as if a corner of a veil had been lifted over the foggy memories left by Chu Tsonglan, and a portion of an incantation and memory became exceedingly clear. The newfound memories had to do with harnessing magical treasure and the harnessing magic incantation. This helped Han Shuo realize that he had gained better understanding of some part of Chu Tsonglan's indistinct memories under somewhat bizarre circumstances. A strange whooshing sound abruptly interrupted his thoughts, and Han Shuo subconsciously raised his head to search for its source. He was flabbergasted. The little skeleton was waving the sharp bone dagger around in an airy dance. Cold light sparkled around the little skeleton's body in dizzying waves underneath the moonlight. The bone dagger followed the movements of the little skeleton's hand and stabbed multiple times at the straw figure, leaving it with the appearance of Swiss cheese. Han Shuo recollected himself after being dumbfounded, his face full of incredulous joy. He threw his head back to the heavens and roared, "Hot damn, I'm awesome." Chapter 28. City of Zajosky. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. A streak of white light flashed as Han Shuo and several necromancy students materialized within a circular, magical matrix that was filled with magical symbols. Han Shuo had experimented 3 times last night and realized that he really could send his small skeleton to the other dimension and successfully summon it back again. He joyfully took out the money bag, that had been hidden under his bed, and made his preparations for the field trip. He now wore an expression of astonishment as he continuously darted his eyes around in close observation of the magical matrix. The large matrix was circular in form, and on it was an enormous, 6-pointed star on the rock beneath his feet. Exquisite magical forms were carved into the magical columns nearby, and a faint magical current emanated from the entire matrix. He had been standing in a similar transportation matrix in the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force a second ago. When the matrix had activated, Han Shuo could only feel the strong magical current that permeated the air. He had appeared here after a flash of white light. From the students around him, Han Shuo understood that this was a magical transportation matrix. This kind of magical transportation was extremely rare and required a lot of complex magic and was costly to set up. Even eminent mages needed numerous quantities of magical ingredients in order to properly arrange the transportation matrix. Stop looking, the magical transportation matrix is amazing alright, but you don't need to make a big deal over it. Off to the side, Lisa spoke up as she saw Han Shuo looking around, gobsmacked. This magic was truly wondrous. Although Han Shuo had heard of magical transportation matrices, this was the first time he'd experienced using one, and naturally felt it was quite incredible. He gave up his observations only after he had carefully contemplated the area around the matrix. Han Shuo understood that with his currently shallow grasp of magical knowledge, he probably wouldn't even understand the theories behind the transportation matrix, much less be able to set one up. Not to mention that constructing such a transportation matrix would need an inordinate amount of magical ingredients. Even the Empire was unable to set one up in all the cities. Each activation required an awe-inspiring amount of energy. Even some ordinary noble families would be unable to bear the burden. If it wasn't for the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force having such a magical transportation matrix, and Han Shuo hitching a ride off the coattails of the students, it would have been extremely unlikely for him to ever travel through one in his lifetime. This area was the Zajosky city on the outskirts of the Lancelot Empire. Zajosky was the biggest city in the southwestern part of the empire, with the Kurlan Valley to the west of it. One would end up in the land of the orcs if they traveled west of the Kurlan Valley. To the south of Zajosky was the Dark Forest. All sorts of strong magical creatures lived within the expansive Dark Forest, including the elves that worship nature. Things had never been peaceful for the city of Zajosky. The Empire had situated a lot of troops in Zajosky for defending against invasions by the savage orcs. It was said that the orcs lived in very barren land, and that the savage race had long wanted to occupy the fertile lands of the Lancelot Empire. Zajosky was the Empire's strongest point of defense in the southwest, and naturally enjoyed a lot of attention from the orcs. The Dark Forest was also a turbulous area. Although the elves that worshipped nature were on more or less friendly terms with the Empire, many of the magical creatures within the Dark Forest often walked out of the forest to appear within nearby towns and villages. This caused things to be a bit tense in the towns and villages next to it. Perhaps the Empire expended so many resources in setting up a magical transportation matrix within the city because of this unease. On one hand, this facilitated a connection between the Empire and Zajosky, but on the other it was unable to support large-scale military deployments due to the sheer energy requirements needed to send through a limited amount of people. Zajoski's peculiar position turned this region into a heaven for adventurers. Merchants and adventurers of all sorts came here thirsty for gold and treasure. Whether it was the crystal cores, bones, skin, or flesh of the magical creatures within the dark forest, the priceless magical equipment forged by the elves, some precious jewels from the barren wastes of the Orc lands, or the multitude of other items with heavy profits, these were the intended targets of all the gold rushers. Noble and respected mages, welcome to the city of Zajoski. We hope you enjoy yourselves in Zajoski, and obtain all that you need. The official in charge of the magical transportation matrix stood next to it and humbly bowed to Han Shuo and company. Thank you for your warm words, I'm sure we will receive our just rewards. Fanny smiled and nodded her head at him, and then glanced at the necromancy students. She said softly, "This is not a peaceful place, everyone be careful and don't let anything happen to you. Let's go." Fanny led the crew outwards along the main street when she finished speaking. Like Han Shuo, the students were gazing around with curiosity, measuring up everything and everyone around them. Apart from the two teachers Fanny and Jean, there were 9 necromancy students and Han Shuo, bringing the total to 12 people. Fanny and Jean were adept necromancers. Fitch had not traveled with the group because he was still undergoing the test for adept mages. The strength of the remaining 9 students was unevent. Other than a journeyman mage named Derek, the rest were novice mages and magic apprentices. The buildings lining the street were all cut out of hard rock, and lacked a touch of artistic beauty compared to the other buildings within the empire, but gained a few traces of dignity and toughness. Due to the frequent orc attacks, not only were the Zajoski city walls built to be impregnable, but even the buildings within the city were built on a principle of durability. Along the way, Han Shuo noticed that many weapons stores, pharmacies, magical item stores, and provision stores could be found to the sides. There were also some small taverns for entertainment, a slave auction, and a bartering place for all sorts of materials. It seemed that merchants knew what sort of transactions would be most profitable because of the unique characteristics of this location. Those entering and exiting these locations were warriors, knights, mages of different majors, robbers, archers, merchants, poets, and even a few slender, pointy-eared, beautiful elves, who were obviously from the dark forest. The sounds of the street vendors, the elegant low chants from the poets, the brays from the warriors' steeds, the clashes of sudden conflicts, these scenes were all completely beyond Han Shuo's imagination. He was exceedingly astonished and had a better understanding of this chaotic city. Nothing much to see, we need to leave the city before sundown. This isn't a place where we should spend much time. Our next stop is the town of Droll. If we can't reach it by sundown, we'll have to camp in the wilderness tonight. Jean called loudly and urged the students to walk faster. Heh, they're all flowers in a greenhouse. For some of them, it's their first visit to the city of Zajoski. No wonder they're so curious. They won't be in the future. Fanny swept her clear eyes across the group and smiled involuntarily when she saw a few students, extremely excited by the sights they were seeing for the first time. "Brian, are you okay with carrying so many things on your back?" Next to Han Shuo, Lisa frowned as she looked at Han Shuo and voiced a question. Lisa, when did you start caring for Brian? This doesn't seem like you." Novice Mage Bella looked askance at Lisa and asked oddly. Apart from being in charge of all the random little things, Han Shuo was also in charge of providing manual labor during this field trip accompaniment. Although wondrous space rings that could hold items existed in this world, they were quite expensive. It would be difficult for even ordinary noble families to obtain one, not to mention commoners. None of these necromancy teachers and students were lucky enough to possess a space ring. Everyone had packed heavily for this field trip. As an errand slave, Han Shuo had naturally taken up the role of a pack mule. Many items were lashed onto Han Shuo's back, shoulders, wrists, and even his 2 legs. No one thought Han Shuo could carry so many items on him in the beginning, but they had piled all their belongings onto him after finding out with surprise that Han Shuo could still walk with ease when loaded down with so much. Although Han Shuo could play the fool and carry less, he didn't do so in order to further train his own body. He happily accepted the burden, and now carried all sorts of items on him. A few bags even hung around his neck, with only a happily smiling, dust-covered, face apparent. "Oh, I'm not having any problems." Han Shuo smiled slightly at Lisa and said in a carefree manner. After that incident in the trap in which Han Shuo had passionately declared his love, Lisa's attitude towards Han Shuo had taken a huge turn. Her words had already started to defend him. Seeing that Han Shuo didn't recognize her good intentions and said such things, Lisa harumphed lightly and muttered to herself. "Can't recognize my intentions, what an idiot, and it's all thanks to you. If it wasn't for your agony of the soul, how could Brian become this crazy? But it's a bit strange, Brian seems to have gotten taller and stronger since then, and even his energy has improved. Lisa, you're quite amazing." Bella exclaimed softly and said enigmatically. "Bella, none of your business." "Shut up." Lisa flicked a glance at Bella and responded coldly. "TCH. Who wants to mind your business? Just curious." Bella snorted and replied. All right, calm down. Let's walk faster to leave the city. Your delicate bodies are in for it if we don't reach Droll before nightfall." Fanny creased her brow and admonished lightly, and then looked at Han Shuo. She said softly, "Brian, are you truly all right?" Han Shuo nodded and smiled slightly, saying decisively, "No problem. Good rations give me strength." Fanny smiled and giggled upon hearing Han Shuo's words, saying, "Looks like me asking the school authorities to improve your rations has actually had some effect." The crew engaged in no more idle chatter after that, and the students' gazes did not continue to wander around. They all rushed towards the city gates. Chapter 29. The Feeling of Contempt. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. The band of 12, including Han Shuo, were stunned by the magnificence of the city gates when they arrived at the city of Zajoski. The gates were all extraordinarily palatial and made from the strongest of rock. They were the color of dried blood, and no one knew whether or not it was because too much of it had drenched the stones. Numerous guards, dressed in full body armor, patrolled the city walls, several meters above the ground. All sorts of defensive measures could be seen on the city walls. From afar, the city gates looked like the open, fanged mouth of a bloodthirsty magic creature that devoured everything underneath the sun. Several sharp, cold, hangnails, that looked like the sharp teeth within the creature's mouth, peppered the city walls. Their cold light sparkled underneath the sunlight, giving people an incredibly deterring, spectacular feeling. The two ink-black, grand gates, refined from who knew what, were open. The city entrance was immensely expansive, enough for 10 horses to walk in abreast. It was quite crowded in front of the door, and various mammoth and strange magic creatures slowly threaded their way through the entrance into the city, with all sorts of people and items on their backs. These magical creatures were larger than any beasts Han Shuo had seen before. They were about 5 meters tall and 10 or so meters long. Their skin was dark brown, with heads shaped like an elephant's. Their faces were covered in wrinkles, with 2 curved, white tusks jutting out from their cheeks. The tusks themselves were a meter long. This is an earth dragon, a gentler type of magical creature. They are easily tamed and move slowly, but can carry heavy loads. They're a popular form of transportation within the empire. Merchants use earth dragons to transport heavy loads and trade with different areas. Fanny explained with a smile when she saw many students gazing at the earth dragons in astonishment. "Master Fanny, look after them while I go register at the officers' quarters. I'll also borrow a few battle steeds, otherwise we'll never make it to Droll by nightfall on foot." Jean looked at Fanny with sparkling eyes and spoke with a smile. His gaze fell on Fanny's beautiful face and didn't stray for a moment. The entire necromancy major knew of Jean's feelings for Fanny. Fanny herself was also well aware, but she never expressed anything. Jean wasn't in a rush and seemed to want to move Fanny with his sincerity. He often made use of various opportunities to express his feelings, and staring at her soulfully for long periods of time was one of them. Han Shuo cursed privately upon seeing Jean's unfettered gaze. In Han Shuo's mind, Fanny had long since become his personal property. He would naturally be irritated that other people were peeping at her in front of him, but right now, he was just a mere errand slave and wasn't strong enough to show his strength. So although it rankled at him, he had to keep himself in check. Go ahead, I'll watch them carefully. Fanny gave a tepid response and agreed with a smile, avoiding Jean's fiery gaze. She turned her head to look at the magnificent city walls and said with emotion, although I've seen this multiple times, I always feel proud of the Zajosky city gates whenever I come back to visit. It's because of these durable city gates that the savage orcs have always retreated with nothing to show for their efforts. Han Shuo was weighed down with all sorts of items, and just about drowning in all of it. Everyone had stopped at this moment except for Han Shuo. He bent and then straightened his legs, twisting his wrists, and repeated the same boring movements. Brian, what are you doing? Amy was standing next to Han Shuo and saw the piles of items move along with Han Shuo's body. It caught her eye and she asked in astonishment. The others noticed his movements after Amy had spoken up and also concentrated their attention on Han Shuo, a perplexed look on each of their faces. Nothing much, I'm feeling a bit sore, and moving around will alleviate it. Han Shuo replied calmly with a dumb expression, truly looking more than a bit dumb. Stupid, be careful. You're carrying valuable items. If you accidentally break one, we wouldn't be able to cover the losses, even if we sold you. Bella frowned and said coldly. Bella, you're such an idiot. Those things are quite sturdy. How could they break so easily? No one has allowed him to carry anything truly precious or fragile. Lisa casted a look of disdain at Bella and replied sarcastically. You ladies are always arguing. Stop it. We always run into some danger, whether big or small, when we travel for training in the outside world. You should unite as a team, or we're bound to run into problems further down the road. Fanny frowned and tried to separate the two when she saw Lisa and Bella were about to bicker again. Han Shuo completely ignored Bella's cold jeers and continued to repeat those boring actions. Those motions hadn't been left behind in Chu Tsonglan's memories, but were muscle-building actions that Han Shuo had seen before. In order to keep improving his body and break out of the solid realm, Han Shuo was taking advantage of every second to train his body. After a while, Jean returned with an ugly expression and empty hands. When he walked up to Fanny, he said furiously, "Damn it. They asked me for money." Fanny's elegant brows knotted together and she spoke in surprise upon hearing those words. Our Babylon Academy of Magic and Force is the cradle for the Empire's knights, warriors, and mages. We nurture so many talents every year for the Empire. Even many of the guard officers and mages stationed in the city of Zajosky graduated from our academy. There's a protocol between the academy and Zajosky. How dare they not lend us battle steeds? The guard officer was going to lend me the steeds when I said I was from the academy. When I offered my identification and he saw that we're from the necromancy major, he actually mocked me. He demanded 50 gold from me, saying that we would receive no steeds if we didn't pay up. He further added that our necromancy major has never nurtured any talents for the Empire before, and thus shouldn't enjoy free benefits. Jean was maddened and bit off his words. When the students heard his words, they too found a common enemy and shouted angrily, calling for revenge against the guard officer. It would seem that the feeling of contempt was a hard one to swallow. These students were already a bit aggrieved at joining an unpopular major, and were hard-pressed to contain their anger now that they were so ignored. Forget it, take out 50 gold for him from the funds. These guard officers have lived here for a long time. Add to that the fact that our major truly has declined, and occupies a lower standing in the academy. It's no wonder then they think less of us. I will report this matter to the dean upon my return. Let's not get into a fight with them right now. Fanny shook her head, spoke a few conciliatory words with a dejected expression and finally made this reply to Jean. Jean at first disagreed with Fanny's words, saying that they could not allow such arrogant soldiers to strut around, but he sighed slowly and shook his head after a few placating words from Fanny, gloomily accepting 50 gold coins from Fanny's hands and walking to the side of the city gates. Han Shoa observed a few people, then looked at the despondent Fanny. He threw a glance at the far-off guard officer and internally vowed that one day, the necromancy major would regain its past glories through his hands, and that people would tremble in fear at the sound of a necromancer. Don't be depressed. No one dared to look down on us when the necromancy major was at its peak. It's just that the necromancy major suffered from the ostracization of all the majors for a while. Legends speak of a great magic war that caused high casualties amongst the necromancers and the loss of many incredible, powerful spells. This is what's caused the decline of necromancy. Our trip to the dark forest this time is in search of a cemetery of death that I've heard rumors about. It's said that a wise mage, who studied necromancy for many years, once stayed within the cemetery of death. If we can find the cemetery and obtain the magical tomes of necromancy inside of it, then perhaps we can alter the current situation that the necromancy major is in. Fanny spoke bracing words of comfort upon seeing students become melancholy. Many cheered up after hearing Fanny's words, and expressions of joy and astonishment crossed their faces. It would seem that they were all prepared to give their all in this time's external outing. Seeing the ardor on everyone's faces, Fanny gave a silent, involuntary sigh. Although news had broken of the discovery of the cemetery, the person who discovered it died not long after walking out of it. The dark forest was vast, and to search for something within it was like looking for a needle in a haystack. Even she didn't hold much hope. Besides, if such a location was truly discovered, it was bound to draw in a horde of adventurers. It would be a bit unrealistic to think that the power of their band of 12 would be able to retrieve what they needed at that time. Fanny merely wished to comfort everyone with her words. The main purpose of this time's outing was to test the students' grasp of necromancy and help them realize magical knowledge in the real world. Aren't these people from the necromancy major? Are you adventuring as well? Why are you all standing here? A sweet voice sounded from afar as the necromancy students were sunk in their own thoughts. It was the light major student from last time, Irene, and a few other students and teachers from the light major. Her ardent pursuer, Claude, was also mounted on a tall battle steed and came clopping in from the distance. None of your business. Don't fall from your horse now. Lisa looked at Irene with contempt and sneered back. I know, you must not have been able to borrow any battle steeds. That's a foregone conclusion. Your necromancy major hasn't contributed anything to the Empire, so of course it's a bit inappropriate that you use the Empire's resources without any payment. Irene chuckled charmingly as sarcasm and mockery filled her holy features. Although Lisa and company were enraged, they couldn't find the words to retort back as Irene spoke the truth. They could only grit their teeth and fume inwardly. Hello, Master Fanny. Light Adept Mage Beecher was mounted on a battle steed and greeted Fanny with a smile. Hello Beecher, are you heading towards the dark forest for adventure as well? Fanny smiled in return and commented lightly. Yes, we plan on traveling to the dark forest and hunting down the magic creatures that are often a nuisance to the villages around the forest. We'll be testing the students' command of magic while giving back to the Empire. We'll be off, see you later. Beecher replied gentlemanly, but Han Shoa could still discern a trace of disdain in his eyes, as if Beecher looked down on the necromancy crew. Jean finally brought 6 battle steeds over after Beecher and the light major folk had zipped by on their large horses. Jean's horses were obviously subpar to the ones the light major students had, whether in terms of physique or in number. It would seem that the necromancy major still couldn't obtain equal treatment even after paying 50 gold extra. But the necromancy group numbered 12 people, whilst there was only 6 battle steeds. Therefore, each horse had to carry double. The students looked at each other and quickly paired up, leaving Han Shuo, Fanny, Jean, and Bach as the odd ones out. Bach, you and Brian share a horse while I ride one with Master Fanny. Jean's eyes darted quickly and he became overjoyed when he connected the dots. He smiled happily at Bach. No. I'm definitely not riding a horse with that dirty errand slave. Bach held a grudge against Han Shuo and immediately cried out in dissatisfaction. Everyone knew Jean's thoughts. This was a golden opportunity to get close to Fanny. He was about to respond huffily to Bach's yell when Fanny suddenly smiled. Since Bach is unwilling, then I'll ride with Brian. Heh, thank you Master Fanny. I'm coming. Han Shuo was elated and joyously brushed past Jean, striding quickly towards Fanny.